What is up, gamers? How are we doing today? It's me, Dan, moderately anonymous MTG, and we are here to talk about one of my favorite decks in the world that is just not good anymore, and that is Bloodpod. Bloodpod is a hard stax deck that uses Tymna the Weaver and Tana the Bloodsower as its commanders, and while you're not going to see anybody playing it now, especially in the era of 90 or 75-minute round times in tournament magic, this is one of the old guards of cEDH. This was one of the most popular decks in the meta, maybe not ever the strongest, but it was always omnipresent. But even the name will tell you just how old this deck is, because Bloodpod comes from Birthing Pod, which is the combo engine of the deck, and the Blood part is Blood Moon, which I think that we've all decided is pretty unplayable years ago now. So yeah, it can tell you just exactly how long ago Bloodpod was made and was popular. Overall, I'm not really mad at the combo in general and what the deck is trying to do, but I think that the mentality of what the deck wants to be is vastly outdated in 2024. Now, Birthing Pod was one of the decks that I was grinding my teeth on when I was getting into the cEDH meta, and I actually took Bloodpod to one of the only competitions that I've ever competed in before. So Bloodpod got a very special close to my heart. So I wanted to take a look at it and see if we can update this deck for the 2024 meta to make it maybe not the most competitive deck, but a deck that can stand on its own 2 feet. Traditionally, what has made Bloodpod decks good is exactly what I think is making it bad in 2024, and that's its reliance on Rule of Law effects. Rule of Law reads like a card that shuts down the table, makes it so nobody can play Magic, but what it does in action is it allows the strongest decks to sculpt really strong hands over a couple of turns, wait until they can find the right time to bounce the Rule of Law, and then just go off. And of course, this is the problem with all stax decks. So my first thought when redesigning this deck is, what are we going to do to up the power level? And my first thought was to get rid of a lot of these hard stax effects. So the first thing that we did is get rid of these symmetrical stax pieces. The one that we have left is Archon of Emeria, which of all of the ones is the most asymmetrical of the Rule of Law effects. And the reason that I feel comfortable relying on this one is that we have plenty of sack outlets in the deck to get rid of it when we're ready to get rid of it. And that's sort of the main point that I think Bloodpod was really getting stuck in its own tracks there, was just that they played too many stax pieces that ended up affecting its own game plan. You can see how it creates friction in a deck where the main engine is Birthing Pod when you're running Collector Oof, obviously. So we've talked about the Rule of Law, and obviously to specifically mention why the Rule of Law effects are so bad, it's just the fact that you have to cast more than one spell sometimes. And I know that that sounds incredibly obvious, but it's the same reason why we're also not running Deafening Silence, which is another classic of this kind of deck, because it is so creature-centric. And Deafening Silence, for the record, is a card that I think is really fantastic. It's incredibly strong. It really heavily affects the first few turns of the game, but the thing that it also does is hinder you when you're trying to win later on in the game. Again, Birthing Pod is our main combo engine. That is a non-creature spell. It's the only one we're going to get to cast that turn if we have the Deafening Silence out, and that is a really hard thing to get rid of. It's not the same as an Archon of Emeria where we can just Culling the Weak and get it off of the battlefield. That's sticking around unless we have something like an Assassin's Trophy or something like that that we can use to blow it up. This is another spot where I think traditional Bloodpod lists are shooting themselves in the foot. And another key point that you're going to find is that we have no Thalia Guardian of Thraben effects in our list. There's no Thalia, there's no Thorn of Amethyst. Trinisphere I thought about, but I've seen a Trinisphere give away a game just as many times as I've seen these other effects give away a game. And in that same train of thought, while Thalia effects are great in the first couple of turns and they really slow down the faster decks, what they also do is stop our ability to rely on our opponents. We all understand why casting Defense Grid or Teferi Time Raveler and passing is a bad idea. Thalia gets to be at that level at a certain point of the game too. As a person who's played a lot of games with Thalia on this deck, you are going to end a lot of games where an opponent with a Force of Will in their hand just tapped the wrong way and they weren't able to help protect the table from a win from a faster opponent. Obviously, the point is to slow down our opponents and to put them on our level, but we have 3 other opponents who also don't want to lose the game. We need to be able to utilize them, and taking away more of those effects that stop our opponents from helping us out, I think is going to be a huge boon for this deck. So besides the Archon, we're running all of the best asymmetrical stax pieces. We've got the Dauntless Dismantler, we've got Manglehorn, we've got things like Mayhem Devil to go off with Dockside Extortionist, we've got Orcish Bone Masters to control the draws, the classics like Draenith Magistrate, and then some things that are a little bit less traditional but still very powerful creatures in Drana and Linvala to shut off creatures. This is a spot typically occupied by the original Linvala, but Drana and Linvala just does a little bit more. Great card. We also have Shield Dread the Apocalypse to also beat up on those draws, make those long games really painful for our opponents, and Elish Norn, Mother of Machines, to stop Thoracle combos, opposing Docksides, and double up on our own Docksides, Felidar Guardians, etc. Another space where Bloodpod really got left behind in the modern era is its interaction package. Again, for a deck that really wanted to run Rule of Laws, it was also running something in the range of 30 to almost 40 creatures, and most of them not having flash. This is great if you're slapping down something really hardcore like Archon of Valor's Reach that's going to really drastically change the pacing of the game for the rest of the game, but on the other hand, if that gets Chain of Vapor at your end step, if it gets mana drained on the stack, you have spent a ton of mana to do basically nothing and giving your opponents more time to sculpt their hands. So we're playing as many flash creatures as possible. I think we've got something in the range of 5 or 6 in here. We've got the Orcish Bowmasters, Opposition, Asian, Solitude has even got flash, but then we've also upped the interaction in our instant slots. A few of the pieces that I put in this list that are a little bit more untraditional, especially for the Blood Pod decks, are effects like Culling the Weak. And again, while we don't have Ad Nauseam to pour this into, it is a way to get our Archon of Emeria off the board, or any other stax creature that we might not need, or we might really actually want to get rid of at the moment. And it allows us to transfer that mana into game-winning spells like Vivian on the Hunt, like Invasion of Ikoria, or Finale of Devastation. But overall, my favorite piece of tech, and one that's come up multiple times in playtesting as being absolutely clutch in getting those wins across, is the Last Chance effects, Last Chance and Final Fortune. I'm almost at the point where I think I would want to run the third one, because these effects are so powerful in this deck. And one thing that Stax deck always have trouble with is making up enough time and mana to actually win the game. And these are pushes that really help us get across that threshold. Final Fortune and Last Chance are obviously very risky cards. They need setup to help go off well, but we're in white and we do have a plethora of different silence effects, from literal silence to effects like Kutzel or Grand Abolisher, and those can help us secure those wins against almost anything, barring Boseiju, Otawara, and those sorts of really niche effects. But for a deck like Blood Pod that, with discounting the creature cost for your Blood Pod line, costs 6 mana to go through our whole Blood Pod line between getting a 3-drop into our Kiki Jiki combo, well, the Earthing Pod combo with defeat a 3-drop, maybe your Tymna into Earthing Pod, 2-drop Fellow Guardian, Guardian Blink your Earthing Pod, sacrifice your Fellow Guardian, you go to 5-drop, 5-drop, target, 5-drop target die, that's going to bring Fellow Guardian back from the graveyard onto the battlefield, blink the Earthing Pod one more time, and then we sacrifice Fellow Guardian again to go to another 5-drop, this time Kiki Jiki. Kiki Jiki is going to copy your Karma Guide brings back Fellow Guardian with Kiki Jiki, and then we start copying Fellow Guardian with Kiki Jiki, make an infinite amount of go off for infinite damage. That's a lot of mana, and not necessarily mana that we can always put together at the same time. The Final Fortune and Last Chance really help us push across that threshold, like I said, and really help us get to secure a lot more wins than we otherwise would. One additional thing to think about with timing in this deck as well is this spot with Angel's Grace. Angel's Grace is traditionally not a card that I like very much. Obviously, it's an uncounterable answer to Thoracle or to an Agile attack or something like that, and that's definitely what it's here for, but the way I'm thinking about it in this list is sort of along the same lines as the Final Fortune and the Last Chance. This is another extra turn spell, but on the more defensive side. Obviously, it's not quite as robust or as powerful, but it is uncounterable, and ultimately it's going to affect the amount of time that we're going to have to be able to play this game out. Speaking of speed and mana, another thing that we've done, because we don't have Collector, because we're leaning on effects like Blind Obedience, is we're running more artifacts. Namely, we're getting to run the One Ring, which I think is a lot more powerful than any Collector Oof is going to generally be, especially when we've got so many Blind Obedience effects that can really stack up and help to lock our opponents out on the other side of it. Getting to run the One Ring, getting to run Mana Vault in a deck that's really mana hungry, these are things that the old mentality of Blood Pod is really against, but I think one that's really detrimental to the deck's success overall. One thing you'll see here in the artifact slot, and one that I'm personally a little bit iffy on, but I think is a nice little nod to the original Blood Pod list, is Tanglewire. Tanglewire isn't the most oppressive stacks piece, and it's probably not even one of the best, but I thought this was an explosive enough turn 1 play to really slow down the quicker Grixis decks that it might be worth it. This is a slot that I'm a little bit iffy on. It might be worth taking out, but it's one that I want to continue to test because I think it can be pretty good in the right spots. Other than that, you'll see our enchantment slot is very standard. We've got Splinter Twin to combo with Village Bellringer. We've got Sylvan Library, Survival of the Fittest to set up our creature combos, and of course the Blind Obedience that I've been harping on. And our lands are also pretty standard. Obviously, we've got our Shocks fetches, our dual lands. I have thought about adding City of Traders to this list. We do have a lot of expensive spells, but so far in playtesting, it hasn't seemed like it really needs that extra push. If I were inclined to run more of the Signets and Talismans in this list, I think I would think about it harder, but so far, I think not having that sacrifice land is pretty good. My only real air quotes innovation in the land slots here is the Phyrexian Tower, again to lean on being able to sacrifice our creatures when we don't need them anymore and being able to manipulate the board to our advantage. And then here in the sideboard, we've got some various things that I've thought about and tested in the list, but didn't quite like as much as the rest of it. I'd really love to find a spot for Culling Ritual because that is just an amazingly powerful spell and can really turn the tide in a lot of matchups. It does need a mana sink to go into, but we've got a few of them. They're just not always the most consistent is the part that I'm worried about. And whenever I put together one of these more stacksy lists, Boromir, Warden of the Tower, is an effect that people always shout out. My only problem with Boromir is that I don't think that the indestructibility text is all that valuable. Most of the time, my creatures are either getting bounced by effects like Snap, or they're getting wiped with a board wipe like Cyclonic Rift or Toxic Deluge, both of which don't care about indestructibility, and then of course all of the Swords to Plowshares effects as well. I find it's really more niche effects like Fire Covenant and Lightning Bolt that are really affected by the indestructibility, so I'm just not super impressed with it. I'm not sure that it really needs a slot. The not being able to cast things for free clause is pretty sweet, and it's something that I think about, but we do have Chalice of the Void kind of covering that, and as far as 0 mana rocks, it's not quite the same as being able to block out Fierce Guardianship and things like that, so definitely something to consider, maybe a stronger slot than the Tanglewire. But that's that's it. That's our updated Blood Pot for 2024. This is a deck that I love and I really want to get back out there because I think it's such a cool deck. I don't think that this is one of the great decks in the world, to be honest. I don't think this is going to start topping any competitions, but it's a deck that I really love and I really want to get it back on its feet and getting in fight condition because this is a fun deck to play. It might be more annoying than it is good, but sometimes I want to be the annoying player at the table. I hope y'all enjoyed this deck tech. If you did, subscribe to me here on YouTube, hit the like button, leave a comment, let me know what slots you would pick, let me know what slots you would drop. If you want to see this deck list, go check out the video description. If you want to help support the show, go hit up our Patreon, get access to our private Discord, get access to a bunch of bonus content here on YouTube. Use our TCG Player affiliate link if you want to pick up any of the cool cards that you've seen today. Dragon Shield affiliate link if you want to sleeve them up with some cool card sleeves, and go hit up our merch store if you want to get some awesome merch like this. Thank y'all so much for hanging out with us, and we will catch you next time. Be good to yourselves, everybody.